Is this almost more important of a move than even bringing Calvin Ridley back?
I mean, I think it's definitely comparable. Might be even more important because you know what you're getting with Armstead. You know, Ridley was, can this guy be a one receiver? Can he not be? There were still some question marks. My biggest argument was the fact that we've seen it before from Calvin Ridley, but what we're going to get going forward. We know what we're getting with Arik Armstead, all right? And this guy is a mountain of a man, number one, 6'7", 290, team captain coming from San Francisco, obviously was, you know, one of the staples of that defensive line. And you're getting a guy now that's going to add some of that interior push that's only going to help out Josh Allen, that's only going to help out Trayvon Walker. So did I say I love what Balky did here in saying, listen, we missed out on our wide receiver. We probably have to address that in the draft. Let's go ahead and fill another hole right now in our interior defensive line, and let's get Arik Armstead in here.
Yeah, I think this was probably on their radar. And here's what it tells me also. This is what I like, is the fact that they have a plan, right? You have to have a plan. We kind of knew. I mean, you can't get in this business and be in this business that they are in without a plan. But you're not going to get everybody that you want and covet. And so you have to have a backup plan, what they want to do. Now, the question is, and we'll get into this a bit later on, we're sharing a little bit of everything we're going to talk about, but is Brandon Ayuk part of the catch-up plan at the wide receiver position, or is it drafted number 17 in the first round and go get a young guy? I think these are things that we've been talking about, but the Ayuk stuff now comes to the forefront just a little bit. You have to know, too, the connections to the San Francisco 49ers. Trent Baalke, the GM, obviously was the GM in San Francisco, drafted Arik Armstead, and Ethan Waugh, who is the assistant general manager in Jacksonville now, also came from San Francisco, and he would have a good history and a lot of knowledge about a guy like Ayuk. So we'll get into the Ayuk part of it in just a little bit. But I think the big story here is getting Armstead, because now I feel like that front, Austin, is really good. Trayvon Walker, Josh Allen, and it's not just those guys. I know they need more depth at the pass rusher spot, but Armstead is really a gifted player. And when you have him now headlining that interior, I think that makes Devon Hamilton and guys like Roy Robertson Harris, who you are also heavily invested in, that much better.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it's going to kind of put them to more of a depth position now, whether Devon's going to get the starting spot or whether Roy Robertson Harris will get the starting spot. But on the other side, it's going to be the Arik Armstead show. So, yeah, I mean, I love what they did here. And keep in mind, Brent, I was ready to talk about, well, what kind of defensive tackles do you have in the first round? That's not a conversation anymore. So that's a good thing going into this draft now. All right, do you want to go possibly corner? Do you want to go wide receiver? Like I think they're going to go, depending on how the rest of free agency works out. But the fact that they got a respected player who's still playing at a very high level to shore up that interior, and you have two of the best bookends right now in the NFL, you got to love what you see from this defense. Oh, and by the way, you have a guy in Ryan Nielsen who specializes and get the most out of his players, even on the defensive line. So one would think, all right, Trayvon Walker takes a step forward now, and obviously Josh Allen can remain doing what he's doing. I'm very curious to see, because we talked about this a little bit. There were some rumors, you know, Brian Burns to the Jaguars, Danielle Hunter to the Jaguars. I'm curious now if this is kind of a sure sign that Trayvon Walker stays on the outside, or if they still try to incorporate him working from the three technique and the inside as well.
Well, what do you think? I mean, well, I think I know what you think. You don't want Trayvon Walker.
I think you know what I think, Brent.
But
yeah.
I actually, I thought the same thing, though. I was thinking about our conversations we've had about this, because when they were thinking about Hunter, listen, first of all, let's be very clear. And I had to catch myself on this. Just because Vegas odds had Hunter and Burns heavily tied to the Jags, just because Minnesota reporters and others had them heavily tied to Hunter over the last year, we don't know how tied in they were to getting Danielle Hunter and adding him as a piece. But the curiosity of those rumors and reports and odds certainly brought to our attention, what are they going to do with Trayvon Walker? And I thought the same thing when they got Armstead. You know what he is, Austin. Like, you don't have to worry about that. Now, can you still move people around and make them versatile? Sure. I mean, I'm not telling you that matter-of-factly Trayvon Walker is going to stay where he was this past year. In fact, they even tried moving him around a little bit later in the season. But I do think we can now, in our minds at least, on a piece of paper say, okay, this makes more sense to us. Let's see if Trayvon Walker can graduate to a 14-15 sack season down the road. Let Josh do his thing, let Armstead do his thing, and Devon Hamilton and Roy Robertson Harris and the rest of the pieces fall into place.
Yeah, without a doubt. Like, listen, it's not to say that Trayvon Walker can't be a versatile player, and it's not to say, on those NASCAR packages, on those speed packages, you move him inside. I understand that, but I'm just talking from a base defense, from his primary position. I found it very hard to justify moving a guy who's going into his third year now, coming off of a 10-sack season, to say, you know what, we like what you did there, but let's try you someplace else. No, you had double-digit sacks. Let's go ahead and try you where you were flourishing and keep your hand in the dirt on the outside of the edge.
I think, Austin, this is an attempt, and I don't know if it's kind of an intended attempt for Trent Baalke, because he wasn't here in 2017 with the Jags. But I don't know how you can't be sitting here in Jacksonville. And I actually texted Calais this yesterday. This is Calais Campbell 2.0. I mean, this is him. This is what they're trying to do. Now, in fairness to Calais had a better resume than Arik Armstead did in Arizona by the time he got to 30 years old. Now, Armstead has had some nice moments, but also had some injuries the last couple of years. His high is a 10-sack season. I think Calais, before he got to Jacksonville, was always between 5 sacks and 9 sacks in his career. It was either 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. Nothing above, nothing below. So he was a very consistent player. If you look at Armstead, since he came into the league and was drafted by Baalke, it was 2, 2.5, 1.5, 3. Then he had a 10-sack season in 2019, 3.5, 6. And then he's missed some time over the last couple of years, had no sacks in 22, and he had 5 sacks this past season for the San Francisco 49ers. But I don't say it just like that for Calais. We're also getting a terrific human being in the locker room here in Jacksonville. And we'll talk about leadership in a bit, but this is why I kind of liken it to Calais. He's a 4-time Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee for the San Francisco 49ers. If you've seen some of the things the Niners have done with Armstead, you can just see how good of a guy this guy is, how much he could impact the locker room from a leadership standpoint, is exactly what Calais was brought here to do in Jacksonville and was able to do, not inside the building only, but also in the community. So I really feel like this is an attempt for the Jags to kind of reboot Calais Campbell of 2017. And Calais got to Jacksonville and had his 2 best seasons of his career. Started with a 14.5 sack season in year 1 and then a 10.5 sack season in year 2. I'm telling you this, Austin, if Arik Armstead can give us half of that production, it would be a hell of a signing.
No, without a doubt, and once again, I don't want to read too much, follow the conspiracy theories and all that stuff, but I've been very adamant. This team is adding captains from, pretty legit franchises. We have 2 captains now from the Buffalo Bills in Mitch Morse and Gabe Davis. You have a captain now with Arik Armstead, on a defense and a team in San Francisco that played in a Super Bowl. So to me, and once again, I don't want to read too much into this, last year I could have made an argument and say, you know what, Doug Peterson wanted to focus more on just the culture building, focus on more getting out of his players, and not necessarily calling the plays. I think now you're getting more and more players with leadership qualities, with former team captains from different teams, coming from storied, franchises, that can kind of take over and amplify his message. Where Doug Peterson can go, you know what? We have the guys in the locker room now. These guys can show the younger guys the way of how to do things properly, how to be professional, just like Calais Campbell did. And if that's the fact, then if you're Doug Peterson, you can go, you know what? I can wash my hands now. I'm trying to rebuild this culture. I have the players in the locker room to do that. Let me go ahead and put my glasses back on. Let me go ahead and start calling these plays again.
I want to stay on this for a minute. I didn't think we'd get here so early, but I think you've been hinting at this about the leadership and about bringing guys in like Mitch Morse and Gabe Davis. Andrew Catalan told us about Gabe Davis yesterday. These are guys that I get the captain part of it. I don't want to get carried away with that. But you get the idea when you say captain. They're good football players. They're obviously also leaders. I think maybe the more important thing is what you just said. They came over in those roles from good organizations, successful organizations, winning organizations. Buffalo, they've been through some stuff now. I mean, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, and they were still able to persevere into the playoffs these last handful of years. San Francisco, they've been through some stuff at times from injuries and other things. They got a lot of personality and ego on that roster. And these guys are still able to persevere and win. They know how to get through some of that mud. It raises the question to me, Austin, because I didn't think this, honestly, covering this football team the last 2 years. I did not think the Jags had a leadership problem. I mean, I think the Jaguars had a good locker room. I thought the Jaguars had a good leadership council under Doug Peterson. I mean, I look at these guys from Christian Kirk to I think Trevor Lawrence to Josh Allen to other players on this football team, and I'm like, those are good dudes. and probably good locker room guys and good teammates and good leaders and good in the community. I mean, there's not a guy in that locker room. I used to say this to Rasheed Mathis, like, it doesn't feel like they have any knuckleheads. He's like, trust me, they definitely have a couple knuckleheads in there. But you get my point. So I did not think the Jags had a leadership problem, but what you're seeing with their acquisitions this week, did the Jaguars have more of a leadership problem than we thought? Did they not handle the final stretch of the season when they got adversity as well as Doug Peterson wanted them to handle it?
Listen, like, I'm not trying to call anybody out in that locker room saying they're not great leaders, but I look at it like this. When you're the underdog, it's so much easier to get motivated, to get up, to prove people wrong, right? I mean, you have that automatic chip on your shoulder. And you want to go back to, 2 years ago when people were saying, okay, I mean, this team could be something with Doug Peterson. We'll see what happens with Trevor Lawrence, all this stuff. But what happens? They go on a playoff run. No one's counting them against the Chargers. They come back, defy all odds, win that game, and take the Kansas City Chiefs to the limit. Now, they were the underdog role that year. And when you're the underdog role, like I just said, it's a little easier to get up for those things. When you're the front runner, when you have expectations set up before you, that you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to go on a playoff run, you're supposed to beat Tennessee the last game of the season, when you have all these expectations, that's where leadership comes into the fray. Because now all of a sudden, there's no more chip on your shoulder. So you can't find these conceived means of motivation. You have to go with what you know, and that's the culture, and that's the leadership. I think it was very telling after that Cincinnati Bengals game exactly what this team was, right? And they faltered. They faltered when they shouldn't have faltered. So, yeah, I'm going to hold coaches accountable. I'll hold the locker room accountable, and I'll say I think there was a lack of leadership, a lack of dogs, whatever you want to call it. But that last, 5 games, and I get you beat Carolina, good for you, Bryce Young, all that good stuff. But those last 5 games were very telling of just what you had in that locker room. So I think, yes, they are going to shore up, bring in some more leadership, bring in some experienced guys from experienced teams that have winning traditions, because that's only going to help you and, once again, maybe take some stuff off Doug Peterson, and now he can focus more on that offense.